The world of solo leveling was one where the line between reality and fantasy had blurred beyond recognition. Gates, mysterious portals connecting the human world to dungeons filled with monsters, had appeared decades ago, plunging humanity into chaos. Hunters, individuals blessed with supernatural abilities, emerged as the last line of defense against the monstrous hordes. Among them was Jinwoo, once the weakest E-rank hunter, now a shadow-wielding monarch whose power defied comprehension. But even for Jinwoo, the challenges ahead would test the limits of his strength and resolve. The story began in the heart of Seoul, where the skyline was a jagged silhouette against the setting sun. The city buzzed with life, yet beneath its surface lurked an undercurrent of tension. Gates had been appearing more frequently, and the monsters emerging from them were growing stronger. Rumors spread of a new threat, one that could manipulate time itself, a power no hunter had ever faced. Jinwoo, now a figure of legend, stood atop a skyscraper, his piercing gaze scanning the horizon. His shadow soldiers, an army of loyal wraiths, stood silently behind him, their forms flickering like living darkness. He had come a long way from the frail hunter he once was, but the weight of his responsibilities had only grown heavier. Jinwoo's motivations were deeply personal. His sister, Sung Jinna, was his anchor to humanity, a reminder of the life he fought to protect. His mother, still in a coma from an earlier attack, was a constant source of guilt and determination. And then there were the hunters he had come to respect, people like Cha Hae-in, whose unwavering loyalty and strength had earned her a place in his inner circle. But Jinwoo's journey was not just about protecting those he loved. It was about understanding the true nature of his power and the forces that sought to control it. The conflict began with a sudden disturbance in the fabric of reality. A gate appeared in the heart of the city, its swirling vortex of energy crackling with an otherworldly aura. Unlike any gate before it, this one pulsed with a strange, rhythmic hum, as though it were alive. Jinwoo sensed the danger immediately. His instincts, honed through countless battles, screamed at him to act. He descended from the skyscraper in a blur of motion, his shadow soldiers following like a tidal wave of darkness. The streets below were already in chaos as civilians fled in panic, their screams echoing through the concrete canyons. As Jinwoo approached the gate, he noticed something unusual. Time itself seemed to warp around the portal, slowing and speeding up in erratic bursts. A nearby car froze mid-air, suspended in a moment of weightlessness, before crashing to the ground in a shower of glass and metal. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary gate. He activated his Monarch's domain, a skill that allowed him to manipulate shadows on a massive scale. The ground beneath him darkened as tendrils of shadow spread outward, forming a protective barrier. He could feel the oppressive weight of the gate's energy pressing against him, but he stood firm, his resolve unshakable. From within the gate emerged a figure unlike any monster Jinwoo had encountered before. It was humanoid in shape, its body encased in shimmering armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and in its hand, it held a weapon that pulsed with the same rhythmic energy as the gate. The creature spoke, its voice a distorted echo that sent shivers down Jinwoo's spine. "You are the one they call the Shadow Monarch," it said. "But even you cannot defy the flow of time." Jinwoo didn't respond with words. Instead, he launched himself forward, his movements a blur of speed and precision. His dagger, Kazel's fang, gleamed as it cut through the air, aimed straight for the creature's throat. But the creature was faster than it appeared. With a flick of its wrist, it activated its time-warping ability, slowing Jinwoo's attack to a crawl. Jinwoo felt the resistance, as though the air around him had turned to molasses. But he was no stranger to adversity. With a surge of mana, he broke free from the temporal hold, his dagger slicing through the creature's armor with a spray of golden light. The creature staggered back, its expression one of surprise. "Impressive," it said, its voice tinged with amusement. "But can you keep up?" It raised its weapon, a spear that crackled with temporal energy, and thrust it toward Jinwoo. The attack was impossibly fast, a blur of motion that seemed to defy the laws of physics. But Jinwoo's reflexes were beyond human. He sidestepped the strike, his shadow soldiers surging forward to intercept the creature. The wraiths moved with deadly precision, their attacks coordinated and relentless. Yet the creature's time-warping abilities made it a formidable opponent. It manipulated time to evade their strikes, its movements a dance of impossible speed and agility. Jinwoo knew he couldn't rely on brute strength alone. He activated Shadow Exchange, a skill that allowed him to swap places with one of his shadow soldiers. In an instant, he appeared behind the creature, his dagger poised for a killing blow. But the creature anticipated the move, its time-warping ability allowing it to counter with a devastating strike. The spear grazed Jinwoo's side, drawing blood and sending him skidding across the ground. Pain flared through his body, but he refused to falter. He rose to his feet, his eyes burning with determination. The battle raged on, each clash of weapons sending shockwaves through the city. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers fought valiantly, their attacks relentless and unyielding. But the creature's time-warping abilities gave it an edge, its movements unpredictable and its attacks devastating. Jinwoo knew he needed to change tactics. He focused his mana, channeling it into his most powerful skill, Ruler's Authority. The ground beneath him trembled as shadows erupted from the earth, forming a massive hand that reached for the creature. The creature tried to evade, but the hand was too fast, its grip unbreakable. Jinwoo clenched his fist, and the hand crushed the creature with a deafening roar. For a moment, there was silence. Jinwoo stood amidst the wreckage, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature's body lay broken, its armor shattered and its weapon inert. But as Jinwoo turned to leave, he noticed something strange. The gate was still active, its energy pulsing stronger than ever. And from within its depths, he sensed a presence, a power far greater than anything he had faced before. The creature he had defeated was merely a harbinger, a scout for a larger threat. Jinwoo's eyes hardened as he realized the truth. This was only the beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a blood-red glow, Jinwoo prepared for the battles to come. His shadow soldiers stood at attention, their loyalty unwavering. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but he was ready. For his family, for his friends, and for the world he had sworn to protect, Sung Jinwoo would face whatever challenges lay ahead. And he would do so as the Shadow Monarch, a force of nature in a world teetering on the brink of destruction. Jinwoo stood amidst the shattered remnants of the battlefield, his breathing heavy but steady. The air crackled with residual energy from his clash with the time-warping Monarch, a being whose mastery over temporal manipulation had pushed Jinwoo to his limits. The Monarch's laughter echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder that the fight was far from over. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers, loyal and unwavering, stood at his side, their forms flickering like dark flames in the dim light. But even with their support, Jinwoo knew this battle was unlike any he had faced before. The Monarch's ability to warp time had already cost him precious allies and nearly unraveled his strategies. Now, as the dust settled, a new threat loomed on the horizon, one that would test not only his strength but also his trust in those around him. The ground beneath Jinwoo's feet trembled, and a low, guttural roar reverberated through the air. From the shadows emerged a colossal beast, its body a grotesque fusion of flesh and machinery. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its movements were unnervingly precise, as if guided by an intelligence far beyond that of a mere monster. Jinwoo's instinct screamed at him to act, but before he could issue a command, a voice cut through the chaos. "Jinwoo, wait." It was Cha Hae-in, her sword drawn and her expression a mix of determination and unease. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on the beast. "This isn't just some random creature. It's a construct, a weapon created by the Monarch. If we destroy it, we might be able to disrupt his plans." Jinwoo nodded, his mind racing. The beast was a distraction, a ploy to divide their focus. But if it was tied to the Monarch's power, eliminating it could weaken their enemy. "Shadow soldiers, flank it," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. The shadows surged forward, their movements fluid and coordinated. The beast roared again, swinging its massive claws in a wide arc. One of the shadow soldiers was caught in the attack, its form dissipating into wisps of darkness. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his frustration mounting. He couldn't afford to lose more soldiers, not when the Monarch's true strength remained a mystery. As the battle raged, Jinwoo noticed something peculiar. The beast's attacks seemed to follow a pattern, its movements almost mechanical. He focused his senses, analyzing its behavior. There, a faint pulse of energy emanating from its chest. A core. If he could destroy it, the beast would fall. But reaching it wouldn't be easy. The creature's defenses were formidable, and its sheer size made it a daunting opponent. Jinwoo glanced at Cha Hae-in, who was already moving into position. "Cover me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She nodded, her sword flashing as she engaged the beast head-on, drawing its attention away from Jinwoo. With a burst of speed, Jinwoo darted forward, his dagger gleaming in the dim light. He leapt onto the beast's arm, using its momentum to propel himself higher. The creature thrashed, trying to dislodge him, but Jinwoo's grip was unyielding. He reached its shoulder and plunged his dagger into the joint, severing the tendons. The beast howled in pain, its movements becoming erratic. Jinwoo seized the opportunity, driving his blade into the core. The energy pulse intensified, and for a moment, he thought he had succeeded. But then the core began to glow brighter, a warning sign that sent a chill down his spine. "Get back," he shouted, leaping away just as the core exploded in a blinding flash of light. The force of the explosion sent Jinwoo tumbling through the air, but he managed to land on his feet, his instincts keeping him upright. The beast was gone, reduced to smoldering debris, but the victory felt hollow. The monarch's laughter echoed once more, this time closer. "Impressive, Hunter," the monarch's voice taunted. "But you've only delayed the inevitable. My plans are already in motion, and soon, even your strength won't be enough to stop me." Jinwoo's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his dagger. He refused to let the monarch's words shake him, but a nagging doubt lingered in the back of his mind. The beast had been a test, a way to gauge his abilities. And now, the monarch knew his limits. Before Jinwoo could formulate a response, a new voice interrupted the tension. "Jinwoo, we need to talk." It was Thomas Andre, his usual bravado replaced by an uncharacteristic seriousness. The S-rank hunter approached, his massive frame casting a long shadow. "I've been hearing rumors," Thomas continued, his voice low. "About someone working with the monarch from the inside. Someone we trust." Jinwoo's heart skipped a beat. Betrayal? It was a possibility he hadn't considered, but one that made sense. The monarch's strategies were too precise, his knowledge of their movements too accurate. If there was a traitor among them, it would explain a lot. But who could it be? Jinwoo's mind raced through the faces of his allies, searching for any sign of deceit. Cha Hae-in? No, she had proven her loyalty time and time again. Thomas? Unlikely, given his straightforward nature. But then again, appearances could be deceiving. As if sensing his thoughts, Cha Hae-in stepped forward, her expression resolute. "We can't let this divide us," she said, her voice steady. "Whoever it is, we'll find them. But right now, we need to focus on the monarch. He's the real threat." Jinwoo nodded, his resolve hardening. She was right. They couldn't afford to turn on each other, not when the stakes were this high. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it would take more than words to uproot it. The group regrouped, their initial strategies adjusted to account for the new threat. Jinwoo took charge, his tactical mind working overtime to devise a plan that would give them the upper hand. They would need to strike fast and decisively, exploiting any weaknesses in the monarch's defenses. But even as they prepared, the tension between them was palpable. Trust, once unshakable, now hung by a thread. The final confrontation loomed on the horizon, and Jinwoo knew that the battle ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. The monarch's time-warping abilities, the traitor in their midst, and the ever-present threat of betrayal, all of it weighed heavily on his shoulders. But he also knew that he couldn't afford to falter. The fate of the world depended on their success, and Jinwoo was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. As they moved forward, the shadows at his side, Jinwoo steeled himself for the challenges to come. The battle was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Jinwoo stood at the edge of the crumbling battlefield, his shadow soldiers swirling around him like a living storm. The air crackled with the remnants of the time-warping monarch's power, the very fabric of reality bending and twisting under the strain. The monarch's laughter echoed through the fractured landscape, a sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. Jinwoo tightened his grip on his dagger, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the chaos. He had faced countless enemies before, but this one was different. This one could manipulate time itself, and every second that passed felt like a trap waiting to spring. Just as Jinwoo was about to launch his next attack, a sudden ripple in the air caught his attention. It wasn't the monarch's doing, this was something else. A figure materialized out of thin air, landing gracefully on the cracked ground. The newcomer was tall, his silver hair catching the dim light like a blade's edge. His eyes, a piercing shade of violet, locked onto Jinwoo with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. He wore a sleek, black coat adorned with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift and change as he moved. In his hand, he held a weapon unlike anything Jinwoo had ever seen, a glaive with a blade that shimmered as though it were made of liquid light. "Jinwoo Sung," the man said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of danger. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Jinwoo's instinct screamed at him to be cautious. "Who are you?" he demanded, his shadow soldiers shifting into defensive positions around him. The man smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "You can call me Kale. I'm here to observe. And perhaps intervene, if the situation calls for it." Before Jinwoo could respond, the time-warping monarch's voice boomed across the battlefield. "Kale. You dare interfere in my domain?" Kale turned his gaze toward the monarch, his expression hardening. "Your domain is crumbling, old friend. You've overextended yourself. It's only a matter of time before you fall." The monarch snarled, his form flickering as he manipulated time to close the distance between them. In an instant, he was in front of Kale, his clawed hand slashing through the air. Kale moved with impossible speed, his glaive intercepting the attack with a clash of sparks. The force of the impact sent shockwaves rippling through the ground, forcing Jinwoo to brace himself. Jinwoo's mind raced. Kale was clearly powerful, but his motives were a mystery. Was he an ally? A rival? Or something else entirely? There was no time to ponder, the battle was escalating, and Jinwoo couldn't afford to stand idle. He signaled to his shadow soldiers, and they surged forward, engaging the Monarch's minions in a chaotic melee. Kale and the Monarch exchanged a flurry of blows, their movements a blur of speed and precision. Kale's glaive danced through the air, each strike precise and calculated, while the Monarch countered with bursts of temporal energy that distorted the space around them. At one point, the Monarch attempted to freeze Kale in time, but Kale's weapon flared with a brilliant light, shattering the temporal hold as though it were glass. Jinwoo seized the opportunity to strike. He darted forward, his dagger aimed at the Monarch's exposed flank. But before he could land the blow, Kale's glaive intercepted him, the blade stopping just inches from Jinwoo's throat. "Not yet," Kale said, his voice calm but firm. "He's not ready to fall." Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. "What's your game, Kale? If you're not here to help, then stay out of my way." Kale's gaze was unwavering. "I have my reasons. Trust me," Jinwoo sung, "you'll want him alive, for now." The tension between them was palpable, but before Jinwoo could press further, the Monarch unleashed a devastating attack. A wave of temporal energy surged outward, freezing everything in its path. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers were immobilized, their forms locked in mid-motion. Even Kale seemed affected, his movements slowing as the energy washed over him. Jinwoo, however, was prepared. Drawing on his own power, he activated his domain of the Monarch, creating a protective barrier that shielded him from the temporal onslaught. He lunged at the Monarch, his dagger glowing with dark energy. The Monarch barely managed to evade the strike, his form flickering as he manipulated time to create distance between them. Kale, now free from the temporal hold, joined the fray once more. His glaive cut through the air with blinding speed, forcing the Monarch to divide his attention between the two attackers. The battle became a deadly dance of blades and energy, each combatant pushing themselves to their limits. At one point, Jinwoo and Kale found themselves fighting side by side, their movements almost synchronized. Jinwoo's dagger clashed with the Monarch's claws, while Kale's glaive arced through the air, forcing the Monarch to retreat. But even as they worked together, Jinwoo couldn't shake the feeling that Kale was holding back. There was something he wasn't saying, something he wasn't showing. The Monarch, sensing an opening, unleashed a powerful temporal blast aimed directly at Jinwoo. Kale reacted instantly, stepping in front of Jinwoo and raising his glaive to block the attack. The force of the blast sent Kale skidding backward, but he remained standing, his weapon glowing faintly. "Why did you do that?" Jinwoo demanded, his voice tinged with suspicion. Kale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the Monarch, his expression unreadable. "Because you're not ready to face him alone," he said finally. "Not yet." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jinwoo didn't have time to process them, the Monarch was already preparing another attack. But as the battle raged on, Jinwoo couldn't shake the feeling that Kale's arrival had changed everything. The dynamics of the conflict had shifted, and Jinwoo wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. As the fight continued, the tension between Jinwoo and Kale grew. Their conflicting motives and hidden agendas created a rift that threatened to undermine their efforts. But for now, they had no choice but to work together. The time-warping Monarch was a threat unlike any they had faced before, and if they didn't put aside their differences, they would both fall. The battlefield became a whirlwind of chaos, each combatant pushing themselves to their limits. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers fought valiantly, their forms flickering as they clashed with the Monarch's minions. Kale's glaive cut through the air with blinding speed, each strike precise and deadly. And Jinwoo, drawing on every ounce of his power, unleashed a barrage of attacks that tested the Monarch's defenses. But even as they fought, the question lingered in Jinwoo's mind: who was Kale, and what did he really want? The answer, he knew, would determine the outcome of the battle, and perhaps the fate of the world itself. Jinwoo stood at the edge of the crumbling battlefield, his shadow soldiers arrayed behind him like a living fortress. The air crackled with the residual energy of the Monarch's time-warping powers, distorting the landscape into a surreal patchwork of past and future. The Monarch himself loomed ahead, a towering figure cloaked in shifting temporal energies, his eyes gleaming with a cold, calculating malice. Jinwoo tightened his grip on his dagger, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. He had come this far, but the Monarch's true power was still a mystery, and the stakes had never been higher. The fight began with a deafening roar as the Monarch unleashed a wave of temporal distortion, freezing Jinwoo's shadow soldiers mid-stride. Jinwoo barely managed to dodge, his instinct screaming at him to move faster. He countered with a flurry of dagger strikes, each one aimed at the Monarch's core, but the Monarch simply phased through them, his form flickering like a mirage. "You think your strength alone can defeat me?" The Monarch sneered, his voice echoing with the weight of centuries. "You are but a fleeting moment in the grand tapestry of time." Jinwoo gritted his teeth, his mind racing. The Monarch's power was unlike anything he had faced before, manipulating time itself. He could undo any damage Jinwoo inflicted, rewinding the battle to his advantage. But Jinwoo wasn't one to rely solely on brute force. He had faced impossible odds before, and he would do so again. Summoning his shadow soldiers, he ordered them to attack from all angles, forcing the Monarch to divide his attention. The battlefield became a chaotic storm of shadows and temporal rifts, each clash sending shockwaves through the air. Just as Jinwoo thought he was gaining the upper hand, the Monarch unleashed a devastating counterattack. A massive temporal rift opened above them, pulling Jinwoo's shadow soldiers into its swirling vortex. Jinwoo watched in horror as his army was erased from existence, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The Monarch laughed, a sound that sent chills down Jinwoo's spine. "Your shadows are powerless against the flow of time," he taunted. "You are alone," sung Jinwoo. "And alone, you will fall." Desperation clawed at Jinwoo's heart, but he refused to give in. He had faced despair before, and he had always found a way to rise above it. Drawing on every ounce of his strength, he launched himself at the Monarch, his dagger gleaming with dark energy. The Monarch raised a hand, and time slowed to a crawl. Jinwoo's movements became sluggish, his strikes barely inching forward. But then, something unexpected happened. A surge of energy erupted from within Jinwoo, shattering the temporal hold. The Monarch's eyes widened in shock as Jinwoo's dagger plunged into his chest. For a moment, it seemed like victory was within reach. But then the Monarch smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "You think this is over?" he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." With a wave of his hand, the Monarch reversed time, undoing the damage Jinwoo had inflicted. Jinwoo staggered back, his mind reeling. The Monarch's power was even greater than he had feared. He could manipulate time on a scale that defied comprehension. As the battle raged on, Jinwoo realized he needed a new strategy. Relying on brute force and shadow soldiers wasn't enough, he had to outthink the Monarch. He began to analyze the Monarch's movements, looking for patterns or weaknesses. He noticed that every time the Monarch manipulated time, there was a brief moment of vulnerability, a flicker in his energy. If Jinwoo could exploit that moment, he might stand a chance. But it would require perfect timing and precision, something that was nearly impossible under the Monarch's relentless assault. The turning point came when Jinwoo's closest ally, Beru, made a desperate move. Sensing Jinwoo's struggle, Beru charged at the Monarch, sacrificing himself to create an opening. The Monarch's temporal powers tore through Beru's form, but in that split second, Jinwoo saw his chance. He channeled all his energy into a single, devastating strike, aiming for the Monarch's core. The blade connected, and this time, the Monarch couldn't reverse the damage. He let out a roar of fury as his form began to destabilize, temporal energy spiraling out of control. But the victory came at a cost. Beru's sacrifice weighed heavily on Jinwoo, a reminder of the stakes they were fighting for. As the Monarch's form disintegrated, he uttered one final, chilling warning. "This is not the end," sung Jinwoo. "Time is my domain, and I will return. You cannot escape the flow of fate." With those words, the Monarch vanished, leaving Jinwoo standing amidst the ruins of the battlefield. The aftermath was a mix of relief and sorrow. Jinwoo had won, but the cost had been high. Beru's sacrifice haunted him, a stark reminder of the sacrifices required to protect what mattered most. As he surveyed the battlefield, Jinwoo knew that the fight was far from over. The Monarch's warning echoed in his mind, a grim foreshadowing of the challenges to come. But Jinwoo was no stranger to adversity. He had faced the impossible and emerged stronger. And he would do so again, no matter what the future held. With a heavy heart, Jinwoo began to rebuild his shadow army, his resolve stronger than ever. The battle had changed him, deepening his understanding of the stakes and the sacrifices required. He knew that the Monarch's return was inevitable, and when that day came, he would be ready. For now, he would honor Beru's sacrifice and continue to fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who depended on him. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jinwoo was determined to face it head-on, no matter the cost. The air crackled with tension as Jinwoo stood before the Monarch of Time, his shadow soldiers arrayed behind him like a living wall of darkness. The Monarch's presence was suffocating, a weight that pressed down on Jinwoo's chest with every breath. Time itself seemed to warp around the monarch, bending and twisting in unnatural ways. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his mind racing. The stakes had never been higher. If he failed here, the entire world would be consumed by the monarch's temporal dominion, trapped in an endless loop of destruction and despair. But Jinwoo wasn't alone. His allies, Beru, Igris, and the rest of his shadow army, stood ready, their loyalty unwavering. Yet even with their combined strength, the odds felt insurmountable. The monarch's power was unlike anything they had faced before, and time was running out. The monarch's laughter echoed through the battlefield, a sound that sent shivers down Jinwoo's spine. You think you can defy me, Shadow Monarch? Time bends to my will, and your efforts are but fleeting moments in the grand tapestry of eternity. Jinwoo's jaw tightened. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Every second wasted brought the monarch closer to unraveling the fabric of reality. He raised his hand, signaling his shadow soldiers to attack. The battlefield erupted into chaos as the shadows surged forward, their forms shifting and merging with the environment. Beru led the charge, his insectoid body a blur of motion as he clashed with the monarch's temporal constructs. Igris followed close behind, his blade gleaming with an otherworldly light as he cut through the distortions in time. Jinwoo himself moved with precision, his daggers flashing as he targeted the monarch's weak points. But the monarch was no ordinary foe. With a flick of his wrist, he rewound time, undoing Jinwoo's attacks as if they had never happened. Jinwoo gritted his teeth, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He needed a new strategy, something the monarch couldn't predict. As the battle raged on, Jinwoo noticed something, a subtle pattern in the monarch's movements. Every time he manipulated time, there was a brief moment of vulnerability, a flicker of strain in his expression. It was a small window, but it was enough. Jinwoo's mind raced as he formulated a plan. He needed to exploit that weakness, to overwhelm the monarch before he could react. But to do that, he would need to push himself further than ever before. He called out to Beru and Igris, his voice cutting through the chaos. We need to synchronize our attacks. On my mark, strike with everything you've got. The two shadow soldiers nodded, their eyes gleaming with determination. Jinwoo took a deep breath, focusing his energy. He could feel the power of the shadow monarch coursing through his veins, a dark and primal force that demanded to be unleashed. He closed his eyes for a moment, visualizing the battlefield, the monarch's movements, and the precise moment when he would strike. When he opened his eyes, they burned with an intensity that made even the monarch pause. Now, Jinwoo roared, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Beru and Igris moved as one, their attacks converging on the monarch from opposite directions. Jinwoo himself lunged forward, his daggers aimed at the monarch's heart. The monarch's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly recovered, raising his hand to rewind time once more. But this time, Jinwoo was ready. As the monarch's power surged, Jinwoo activated his own temporal ability, a skill he had been honing in secret. For a brief moment, time itself seemed to freeze, the battlefield suspended in a single, crystalline instant. Jinwoo's dagger struck true, piercing the monarch's defenses and drawing a cry of pain from the ancient being. The monarch staggered, his control over time faltering. Jinwoo pressed his advantage, his shadow soldiers swarming the monarch with relentless fury. The battlefield became a maelstrom of shadows and temporal distortions, the very fabric of reality straining under the weight of their clash. Jinwoo could feel the strain of his abilities, his body pushed to its limits. But he couldn't stop now. He had to end this, once and for all. As the monarch struggled to regain his footing, Jinwoo unleashed his ultimate technique, a devastating attack that combined the power of the shadows with the precision of his temporal manipulation. The monarch's eyes widened in shock as the attack struck, tearing through his defenses and leaving him vulnerable. With a final, decisive strike, Jinwoo plunged his dagger into the monarch's chest, the blade piercing his heart. The monarch let out a final, agonized cry before his body dissolved into a cascade of temporal energy, the remnants of his power scattering across the battlefield. Jinwoo fell to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. The battle was over, but the cost had been immense. His shadow soldiers stood silent, their forms flickering as they absorbed the residual energy from the monarch's defeat. Jinwoo's mind raced as he processed what had just happened. He had won, but at what cost? The monarch's power had been unlike anything he had ever faced, and the toll it had taken on his body and mind was undeniable. As he looked around the battlefield, he realized that this was only the beginning. The monarch of time had been a formidable foe, but there were others out there, each more powerful and dangerous than the last. Jinwoo knew that he couldn't rest, not yet. He needed to grow stronger, to forge new alliances and uncover the secrets of the monarchs. The fate of the world depended on it. With a deep breath, Jinwoo rose to his feet, his resolve hardening. The road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but he was ready. He would face whatever challenges came his way, and he would emerge victorious. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of respite, his shadow soldiers standing guard as he gathered his strength. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. And Jinwoo would be ready. The air crackled with tension as Jinwoo stood face to face with the time-warping Monarch, a being whose very presence distorted the fabric of reality. The battlefield was a chaotic tapestry of shattered landscapes, with fragments of time swirling like shards of glass. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers surged forward, their forms flickering as they clashed against the Monarch's temporal constructs, but the enemy's power was unlike anything he had faced before. Every strike from the Monarch seemed to ripple backward and forward in time, making it nearly impossible to predict or counter. Jinwoo gritted his teeth, his instincts screaming at him to adapt or be erased from existence. The Monarch unleashed a devastating temporal wave, a cascade of energy that warped the battlefield into a kaleidoscope of past and future. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers were caught in the distortion, their forms disintegrating as time itself unraveled them. Jinwoo dodged the wave by a hair's breadth, his body moving with the precision of a predator. He countered with a barrage of shadow spears, each one imbued with his mana to pierce through the Monarch's defenses. The Monarch raised a hand, freezing the spears mid-air before shattering them with a flick of his wrist. "Your efforts are futile, Hunter," the Monarch sneered, his voice echoing across the fractured battlefield. "Time bends to my will." Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. He knew brute force alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to outthink his opponent, to find a way to disrupt the Monarch's control over time. As the Monarch launched another temporal assault, Jinwoo activated his domain of the ruler, expanding his influence to counteract the distortions. The two domains clashed, creating a volatile storm of energy that tore through the battlefield. Jinwoo felt the strain immediately, his mana reserves depleting at an alarming rate, but he couldn't afford to falter. He pushed past his limits, his body surging with power as he tapped into the depths of his strength. The Monarch's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as Jinwoo's domain held firm. "Impressive," the Monarch admitted, "but you cannot sustain this forever." He raised both hands, summoning a vortex of temporal energy that threatened to consume everything in its path. Jinwoo's mind raced. He needed a new strategy, something that could break through the Monarch's defenses. Drawing on his experience, he recalled the lessons he had learned from his battles against other monarchs. Adaptation was key. With a surge of determination, Jinwoo unleashed his shadow soldiers once more, but this time, he infused them with his own temporal energy, creating a counterbalance to the Monarch's power. The shadow soldiers surged forward, their movements synchronized with Jinwoo's will. They dodged and weaved through the Monarch's attacks, their forms flickering as they adapted to the shifting flow of time. The Monarch growled in frustration, his control slipping as Jinwoo's soldiers closed in. "You dare defy me?" The Monarch roared, his voice shaking the battlefield. He unleashed a devastating temporal blast, but Jinwoo was ready. He activated his instantaneous movement skill, appearing directly in front of the Monarch and delivering a crushing blow to his chest. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the air, but the Monarch barely flinched. "Is that all you have?" The Monarch taunted, his eyes glowing with malevolent energy. He retaliated with a series of rapid strikes, each one warping time to make them nearly impossible to dodge. Jinwoo countered with his own flurry of attacks, his movements a blur as he pushed his body to its absolute limit. The two combatants clashed in a high-energy duel, their strikes creating shockwaves that shattered the ground beneath them. Jinwoo's muscles burned with exertion, but he refused to back down. He could feel the Monarch's power waning, his control over time faltering under the relentless assault. Realizing he needed to end the fight quickly, Jinwoo unleashed his ultimate technique, the Shadow Monarch's Wrath. His body was enveloped in a dark aura, his power surging to unprecedented levels. The Monarch's eyes widened in shock as Jinwoo's aura disrupted his temporal domain, creating a pocket of stability within the chaos. Jinwoo charged forward, his movements a blur as he delivered a series of devastating blows. Each strike carried the weight of his determination, his will to protect those he cared about. The Monarch staggered, his defenses crumbling under the onslaught. This cannot be." The Monarch roared, his voice filled with desperation. He summoned a final, desperate attack, a massive temporal rift that threatened to consume everything. Jinwoo stood firm, his resolve unshakable. He channeled all of his remaining mana into a single, concentrated blast, unleashing it directly into the rift. The two forces collided in a cataclysmic explosion, the shockwave tearing through the battlefield and sending both combatants flying. Jinwoo hit the ground hard, his body aching from the strain, but he forced himself to his feet. He couldn't afford to stop now. The Monarch lay battered and broken, his once imposing form now a shadow of its former self. Jinwoo approached him slowly, his breathing heavy but his gaze unwavering. "You underestimated me," Jinwoo said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "You thought time was your weapon, but it's also your weakness." The monarch glared at him, his eyes filled with hatred, but he could no longer fight back. Jinwoo raised his hand, summoning the remnants of his shadow soldiers to deliver the final blow. As the shadows closed in, the monarch let out a final, defiant roar before his form disintegrated into nothingness. The battlefield fell silent, the distortions in time fading as the monarch's influence vanished. Jinwoo stood amidst the ruins, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. He had pushed past his limits, adapting and evolving to overcome an enemy that seemed unbeatable. As he took a deep breath, he felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. He had done it. He had defeated the time-warping monarch. But even as the adrenaline faded, Jinwoo knew this was only the beginning. The war against the monarchs was far from over, and he would need to grow even stronger if he hoped to protect the world he cared about. With a final glance at the battlefield, Jinwoo turned and walked away, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The air crackled with tension as Jinwoo stood face to face with the time-warping monarch, a being whose very presence distorted reality. The battlefield was a chaotic swirl of shattered timelines, fragments of past and future colliding in a maelstrom of energy. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers, once an unstoppable force, were now struggling to keep up, their forms flickering as the monarch's temporal powers disrupted their existence. Jinwoo himself was battered, his armor cracked and blood trickling from a deep gash on his forehead. Yet, his eyes burned with unwavering determination. This was the moment everything would be decided. The monarch smirked, his voice echoing with the weight of countless ages. "You fought well, Shadow Monarch. But time is my domain, and you are but a fleeting moment in its endless flow." He raised his hand, and the air around Jinwoo twisted, slowing his movements to a crawl. Jinwoo gritted his teeth, feeling the oppressive weight of time pressing down on him. His muscles screamed in protest, but he refused to yield. He had come too far, sacrificed too much, to fall now. With a roar, Jinwoo tapped into the depths of his power, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. Shadows surged around him, forming a protective barrier that momentarily resisted the monarch's temporal manipulation. "I'm not just a moment," Jinwoo growled, his voice low and fierce. "I'm the one who will end you." He lunged forward, his blade slicing through the distorted air with a speed that defied logic. The monarch's eyes widened in surprise as the blade grazed his arm, leaving a trail of dark energy in its wake. The monarch retaliated with a wave of temporal energy, sending Jinwoo flying backward. He crashed into the ground, the impact sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself to stand, his grip tightening on his weapon. "You're strong," Jinwoo admitted, his voice steady despite his injuries. "But so am I." He raised his hand, and the shadows around him coalesced into a massive spear of pure darkness. With a swift motion, he hurled it at the monarch, who barely managed to deflect it with a temporal shield. The battle escalated, each strike and counterstrike shaking the very fabric of reality. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers, though weakened, fought valiantly, buying him precious moments to recover and strategize. The monarch, however, was relentless, his mastery over time allowing him to predict and counter Jinwoo's every move. It seemed like an insurmountable challenge, but Jinwoo knew he couldn't afford to lose. The fate of the universe hung in the balance. As the fight dragged on, Jinwoo began to notice something, a pattern in the monarch's attacks, a slight delay in his temporal manipulations. It was a flaw, a weakness that only someone as observant and determined as Jinwoo could exploit. He waited for the perfect moment, biding his time as the monarch grew more confident, more careless. Then, with a burst of speed, Jinwoo closed the distance between them, his blade aimed straight for the monarch's heart. The monarch's eyes widened in shock as the blade pierced his chest, dark energy erupting from the wound. "Impossible," he gasped, his voice trembling with disbelief. You shouldn't have been able to." His words trailed off as his body began to disintegrate, consumed by the shadows. Jinwoo stood over him, his breathing ragged but his resolve unshaken. "Time may be your domain," he said, his voice firm, "but I am the one who controls the shadows. And in the end, even time must yield to darkness." As the monarch's form dissolved into nothingness, the battlefield fell silent. The distortions in time began to fade, the shattered timelines mending themselves as the universe regained its balance. Jinwoo collapsed to his knees, exhaustion finally overtaking him. His shadow soldiers gathered around him, their forms flickering but still standing. They had fought alongside him until the very end, and now, they shared in his victory. The aftermath of the battle was profound. With the time-warping monarch defeated, the balance of power in the universe shifted dramatically. The other monarchs, once confident in their dominance, now faced a new reality, one where Jinwoo, the Shadow Monarch, had proven himself to be a force to be reckoned with. His actions had not only saved countless lives but also reshaped the future, creating a world where humanity had a fighting chance against the forces of darkness. As Jinwoo looked out over the battlefield, his thoughts turned to those who had fought and sacrificed alongside him. He knew that this victory was not his alone, it belonged to everyone who had stood against the monarchs, who had refused to give up even in the face of overwhelming odds. And though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, Jinwoo was ready. He had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, and he would continue to fight for the future he believed in. The shadows around him stirred, a reminder of the power he wielded and the responsibilities that came with it. But for now, in this moment of quiet triumph, Jinwoo allowed himself a small smile. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. And he would be ready for whatever came next.